Should you should you buy now? Oh my God, or should you wait? That's the question that a lot of people are asking at the moment. Probably less people are asking that question at the moment because rates are so high. Everybody's under the impression that they're going to wait for home prices to drop, for interest rates to come down to make housing more affordable. And I get it. Housing prices are crazy, interest rates are crazy, which in turn is making monthly payments crazy. So the idea of waiting to buy a house is something I can get behind, but at the same time, there is a cost to waiting. There's pros to waiting to buy a house, and there's also cons to waiting, both of which we're going to talk about in today's video. At the moment, the consensus is to wait until next year because mortgage rates have now topped 7%. That's put pressure on demand, causing it to slump to the slowest pace since 1997. And on top of that, we're seeing mortgage applications drop because interest rates are now at the highest level since 2001. So the idea of waiting for home prices to come back, interest rates to come down, is one that a lot of people can get behind because it makes housing look more affordable, at least until you dig into the real numbers, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. Now, the real question is, can you actually get house prices to come down and interest rates to come down at the same time? We do know that interest rates tend to follow inflation. So as inflation goes up, interest rates tend to go up. And as inflation comes down, interest rates tend to come down. But at the same time, as interest rates rise, house prices typically go down. And typically when interest rates go down, house prices typically go up. And that's partly what we saw in 2020. Interest rates went down to new historic lows. That fueled buyer demand because it allowed so much more with regards to home buyer affordability. And that's really when you saw this big surge in housing. But as interest rates have gone up, we've seen housing slow because as housing affordability becomes more and more of a problem. So at the moment, I see why people are sitting on the sidelines, scared to jump in, wanting to see home prices come back, actually wanting to see interest rates come back, but I don't think you can actually see both happen at the same time. At the moment, we're seeing interest rates go up, and that's putting a strain on housing prices. So as interest rates climb, housing prices are coming down. And with that said, I believe if interest rates continue to go up, that's going to continue to put a further strain on house prices, reducing them even further. But at the same time, if interest rates stall, if they pull back, if the Fed decides to pivot and pause and stop raising the Fed funds rate, maybe not at the moment, but after the next two adjustments, because I believe both of those are already priced in, well, if interest rates pause at that point, that could put a flooring in housing to some extent. It could keep housing from going down even further. So what does the cost of waiting actually look like? Well, let's take it back a little bit. Let's go back into mid-2020. Home buyers were jumping in the market like crazy at that time because interest rates had gone down, supply was low. There's just a lot of frenzy in the market, and some buyers decided to jump in the market at that time. And those buyers that jumped in, say on a $500,000 purchase price and put 20% down and they got a 3% interest rate, they were able to get a monthly mortgage payment of $1,686 per month. Now, at the same time, there were people saying, I'm not jumping into this market. This is crazy. I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait for housing prices to pull back. I'm going to wait for interest rates to go even further down, making it more affordable. And a lot of those home buyers are still sitting on the sidelines today. And if you were to buy that same $500,000 home today, which you couldn't actually buy because that $500,000 home 2 years ago is actually worth around $700,000 today because a lot of those homes appreciated at least 40%. But let's just say you could get that same $500,000 home today and you were financing it at today's interest rates of 7.5%. That same mortgage payment today would be $2,796 per month. That's over an $1,100 difference in just 2 years. So the cost of waiting over that 2-year period was $1,100. Now, you might be sitting saying, well, Jeb, home prices are going to pull back. That's what I'm waiting on. And I can understand that and I can get behind that. But let's take a minute here and talk about the numbers, what that actually looks like. So for house prices to continue down even further, you have to believe that interest rates are going to continue to go up because as we discussed earlier, because there's really no world in which interest rates come down and house prices go down at the same time because we know those two are adversely correlated. But with that said, let's just say that interest rates stayed the same. They stayed stayed where they are at the moment, and you're able to get a 7.5% interest rate. Well, in order for you to obtain or get the payment that someone got back in 2020 on that $500,000 home, you need home prices to drop by nearly 40%, which is what I've talked about in other videos. Now, you might be saying, well, Jeb, I'm seeing home prices drop. So the markets out there that have seen the biggest declines, like San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, they've seen 8 to 10% declines in home prices according to the latest data out there. And that's with interest rates going from 3% to 7%, so nearly doubling. So the thought of housing dropping by another 30% says you think that inflation is going to continue to go out of control and that the Fed is going to continue to put their foot on the gas pedal, raising interest rates for an extended period of time. So maybe you're right by waiting. At the end of the day, you have to do what's right for you. You have to buy for the right reasons in your life. You're not buying because someone's telling you to buy or not to buy, or at least you shouldn't be. You should be buying because it's the right time in your life, or you should be waiting because it's the right time for you to wait. Maybe you're trying to save more money. Maybe you want to make the housing payment more affordable, and you think by waiting, you're going to get that. Both of which I can understand. I can understand people being scared at the moment, and then I can also look into past experiences, people talking about crashes, people talking about bubbles and what have you, and them not coming to fruition, and people sitting on the sidelines missing opportunities. So at the end of the day, do what's right for you. But in the meantime, let's talk about some of the pros of waiting, because there are definitely pros in waiting, but there's also cons. But either way, it's important to know both, so that if you're thinking of waiting, you know some of the advantages, maybe the disadvantages, and if you're thinking of buying, you know some of the risk associated with buying at the moment. But before I do that, I want to take a quick minute here and say thank you for taking the time to watch. My channel continues to grow because of your support. So with that said, if you haven't done so already, I would appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And for doing that, I'm going to give you a picture of my youngest son's mullet. So with that said, what are some of the pros of potentially waiting? Well, one of the pros is potentially lower house prices, right? We've talked about the higher rates go, the lower house prices go, and at the same time, you could also get lower rates. That could be an advantage of waiting, potentially lower interest rates. But the likelihood of getting lower prices and lower interest rates at the same time moving forward isn't very likely. Now, you might get lower house prices and then interest rates come back down, and that could put a flooring in housing from that point, and at that point make housing more affordable. But the real question is, how far do they go down? How far do interest rates come back? Does that create further demand in the market, putting housing back in the crosshairs and people wanting to jump back in, investors wanting to jump back in? It's hard to say. But either the way, waiting might make it a little bit more affordable than where we sit today. And the last thing is, maybe your rent payment would be less than your housing payment. So by waiting, you're actually paying less money per month than owning a property. That could be an advantage for you based on how you look at it. Now, on the other side of it, there's some cons to look at with regards to waiting. The first one is you're continuing to pay rent. So you're paying someone else's mortgage. So let's say hypothetically, your rent payment's $2,000 per month. Every single month you make that payment of $2,000 per month, it goes nowhere. Yeah, you get a place to live, but that's $24,000 at the end of the year that you could put into your own home, paying down the principal, getting mortgage deductions, which is going to lead me into my next con, which is you're missing, the forced savings of paying down the principal on that mortgage. Every single month you make your mortgage payment, you're actually paying down that loan. Whereas when you're renting, you're just paying someone else's mortgage down. At the same time, by keeping your money in the bank, your down payment in the bank, with inflation currently at 8%, you're losing 8% of your money's value every single year. So let's say hypothetically you have $100,000 in the bank. At the end of the year, that's worth $92,000. And at the end of year 2, you're down to $84,000. So by not putting your money to work, you're actually losing money with inflation above 8%. Another con is potentially higher rates. There are people at the moment that are buying properties because they think rates are actually going to go even higher. So maybe by waiting, rates actually go up even further. Yeah, maybe home prices come down, but the cost to afford that mortgage is actually going to go up. Now, in the last video I did, I talked about, buying a lower priced house at a higher rate or buying a higher priced house at a lower rate. And the ideal situation is to buy the lower priced house at the higher rate, because in theory, at some point in the future, interest rates come down, you can refinance, or if you wanted to pay off that mortgage quicker by making additional principal payments or what have you, it's going to be easier to pay off a lower amount of mortgage than a higher mortgage in theory. But what I can tell you in my experience of this business, people live in the payment, not the price. Now, I got a lot of hate comments on the last video saying, Jeb, you're completely wrong. You know, it's always better to have the lower price house. I agree with that if your goal is to pay off the house. But I can tell you, in my experience, most people are not going to pay off their house. Anytime they get equity, like I've said, they refinance, they pull that cash out, they go on vacations, they do improvements, they buy stuff. You know, most Americans lease their cars versus buy them. Why? Because it's less expensive to do it. I can tell you, I know a lot of people out there that have mortgages, and I know very few of them that are actually making additional principal payments every single month trying to pay down that mortgage. In fact, a lot of these people, as soon as values go up and interest rates go down, they pull out cash. They actually owe more on their house now than when they initially purchased their home. So the big idea, yeah, in their heads, the goal might be to pay off their mortgage, but their actions don't actually follow what they're saying. And that's why most people would prefer the lower payment. And that's why interest rates have such a big impact on housing affordability. Now, some other cons associated with waiting might be higher prices than you think. You might think prices are going to go down by 30%, like David Rosenberg, you know, key strategist here. Whereas home prices might not actually go down that much. Another thing you might see by waiting is higher rent payments. Even though rents have come down from their peaks, rents are still up 9% year over year. In fact, there's more Americans right now living with family, living with parents because of surging rents and that strain on affordability. And the last thing you might see is more competition. By waiting for house prices to come down, is that might create more demand in the market. Maybe more investors jump in, maybe home buyers that are sitting on the fence once rates come down are all going to jump in at the same time. And that could create more competition in the market. Again, making it more difficult to get a home when you actually decide to buy. So my goal with this video isn't to get you to buy a house, it's just to make you understand there are definitely pros to waiting, but there's also cons to waiting. And right now there's a lot of unknowns in the market, a lot of fear out there, a lot of headlines, a lot of people on multiple channels telling you it's a bad time to buy, but not actually knowing your situation. So that's why we often preach, buy when it's the right time in your life, have reserves, make sure you're not stretching yourself, and more importantly, make sure you have a longer term time horizon, somewhere between 5 and 10 years.